Hey, pushers, welcome back for part two of our civil rights discussion. We're kind of leading off here now where we've passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 thanks to Lyndon Johnson and the death of Kennedy and the sympathy he used to get that legislation passed in Congress because probably would not have been passed otherwise. Um, but we still have a problem once we give civil rights in the form of ending discrimination based on race. We still have a problem with the fact that blacks in the South can't vote. So uh, that fight continues on. Um, uh, so one of the big things that happens during this is Freedom Summer in 1964. There's a movement all over the South, especially amongst the organizations like Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and SCLC, um, to register blacks to vote because there are obstacles to doing that. We have literacy tests and grandfather clauses and all kinds of crazy things to prevent blacks from voting. So that summer is spent trying to register blacks to vote. And one of the tragic things that happens that summer is the killing of three young teenagers who were registering people to vote. One was a local black kid, and two were Jewish kids from, I think, New York, who were down there trying to register blacks to vote. And the KKK got their hands on them and murdered them. And it was a big deal. The movie Mississippi Burning is a movie about that incident. It's a cool movie. I recommend if you get a chance to check it out. So, the movement goes on to try to register blacks to vote. Um, in 1964, there is in Mississippi, the Democratic Party will not integrate. They won't let blacks join the Democratic Party, or at least represent the Democratic Party at the convention. So blacks joined their own group called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and they were denied by the Democratic Party from admission to the Democratic Convention in 1964, which again tells you a lot about the Democratic Party at that time. They weren't all on board with minority rights as they appear to be today. At least they give lip service to minority rights. But they, back in the 1960s, they certainly were not all in favor of helping black people the way things have changed since then. Um, so again, King goes to Selma for an effort to try and register blacks to vote there. Again, movie Selma is a great movie to depict this. If you get a chance, check that out. This is where you end up having the people crossing over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You're going to see a picture of it in a second, where the state police is on the other side of the bridge and they charge the protesters and beat them. Um, it's a horrible incident that occurs, but it helps lead to the Voting Rights Act because Lyndon Johnson wasn't really big on passing this law, but Martin Luther King kind of forced him into it with the Selma March. The publicity he got for it, prevented him from stalling any longer. It had to get passed. So it was successful. So this kind of represents an important change now in the civil rights movement. Up until 1965, the civil rights movement was fighting something called de jure segregation, or de jure, depending on your pronunciation, but it's de jure. De jure segregation was segregation by law. They were trying to end laws that segregated society. And with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that's accomplished. Okay, so the civil rights movement continues on though after that, and it shifts from the rural South, where they had laws preventing integration. Um, it moves from the South, where it was nonviolent, and now it shifts to the cities. Not just the North, but also California. It shifts to the cities, where they are now fighting something called de facto segregation, where there weren't necessarily laws put in place to block blacks from exercising their rights, but there were certainly limits to them exercising their rights nonetheless. In the cities, you see things like, black neighborhoods where one neighborhood's all black, one neighborhood's all white because of something called redlining, where banks would not give loans to people to buy homes in black areas. This also because our schools are situated based on community. We had segregated schools in the North. Even though the Supreme Court has said you can't have segregated schools, we had them in the North because our communities were segregated, much like Broomall was back in the 1960s. All right, so again, shift in the whole civil rights movement. This is the people crossing over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's John Lewis right in front there I told you about. He's, if this is the first march, but I believe it is, he's about to get his skull cracked, literally broken by one of these state police officers with a club. So not a good day for him. So with the Voting Rights Act getting passed, you do end up with a lot more power of blacks in certain areas of the country. But again, because of the cities in the North and the way things were structured, remember, people in the North, we had white flight in the 1920s, we had white flight in the 1950s. So what you end up in the North is concentrated areas of poor minorities where there are no jobs, and the people were upset. They were justifiably angry that society had kind of abandoned them. So that's what they're trying to fix now with the second part of the civil rights movement. We have new leaders too, leaders like Malcolm X. Malcolm X is kind of famous for his militancy. Whites like to demonize Malcolm X because in the earlier part of his career, he was not in favor of integration. He wanted to have a separate black, areas for blacks only, cities, and whites were not going to be welcome there because early in his career, he did not believe blacks and whites could work together. It leads to something called black nationalism, which was around before him. But you've got the people like Elijah Muhammad with Nation of Islam is promoting this idea of black nationalism, and Malcolm X is a big part of that. He actually did not get along with Martin Luther King, at least early in his career. They did not like each other. It's kind of like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. They did not like each other. They came from different parts of the country. They had different messages and different goals, frankly. Even though they both agreed with the idea of civil rights, how to get it, and what kind of civil rights is what they were fighting for was different between these two guys. So Malcolm X, by the way, Malcolm X changes his tune a little later in his career. He goes on a Hajj to Mecca and sees people of all ethnicities and colors working together, and he comes back to America and he starts preaching the idea of cooperation with whites and unity and peace. And for that, the Nation of Islam assassinated him in 1965 and killed him because they saw him as a traitor to their cause. So not a good time for Malcolm. Anyway, that's Malcolm X. By the way, whites like to portray him as an ignorant, crazy person. He wasn't. He was a very intelligent guy, a very compassionate guy, very able to move people to his cause, and was very effective at that. So another big group that comes out of this time period that's often villainized by white people is the Black Panther Party. This is a group comes out of Oakland, California. Stokely Carmichael's a part of it. Huey Long is a big part of it as well. This group is organized to try and prevent police brutality in Oakland, California, where it was rampant. It spreads across the country and becomes very, very popular. I've attached a video to this, the documentary about the Black Panther Party. I strongly encourage you to watch it to really understand what the Black Panther Party was about. Like I said, white society likes to call it a terrorist group and all kinds of things like that. They're not. Being a self-defense organization doesn't make you a terrorist organization. Their idea was they would patrol urban areas, and whenever they saw a police officer confronting a black person, they would simply observe. Now, people didn't like that because they would often observe while carrying weapons, because they like to make an issue of the fact that the Constitution says you have the right to bear arms. That's pretty much a white thing. When black people tried to bear arms, they were stopped. So the Black Panther Party kind of had a militant part of it that often used weapons. But again, they were just trying to make the point that American laws were hypocritical and didn't often include black people. So mostly the Black Panther Party was all about trying to help black communities. They had a list of 10 rules that they had to follow if you're going to be a Black Panther. And a lot of free lunches. Some of their, a lot of, well, not some, but a lot of their language they used had communist kind of overtones, which scared a lot of white people as well. So, but again, if you look at the video, the documentary about the Black Panther Party, you're going to get a different view of what most people kind of think of them as in the 1960s. Even today, there are some politicians that like to scare people by saying, hey, there's a Black Panther out at this polling place intimidating people to vote. It's still a boogeyman for a lot of people in this country. But again, if you watch the video, you'll have a better understanding what the Black Panther Party was really about. Okay, so we have lots of riots taking place. It's another, these folks, Malcolm X, like I said in the beginning, was not about peace. Him and Stokely Carmichael, their view was by any means necessary. Stokely Carmichael had been part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, but he changes because in the 1960s he says, look, we've changed the laws, but nothing else is changing, so we've got to fight back. And his idea was that if you punch me, I'm going to punch you back. And so you see these riots taking place. And again, you're seeing riots take place today. Riots are a result of people who have no other alternative in society to express themselves. Back in the 60s and even today, we suppress black votes in urban areas. We economically they live in depressed areas. We basically haven't come a long way since the 1960s, and as a result of that, when people are frustrated and angry and they don't see any other option, they tend to riot. And so it's like I said, that hasn't gone away. But in 1960s, these riots were often very deadly. And again, it kind of made this is where you see whites abandoning the civil rights movement because they didn't understand. Hey, why would you burn down a building? That doesn't accomplish anything. But again, I think that's a lack of empathy and understanding of what the folks in these urban areas are really upset about. And it's also a lack of organization by these urban folks, blacks in urban areas. They're unorganized. They have no power, and because of that, again, they use violence to lash out. It's a sad truth. Okay, so moving on here. Yeah, there's still a lot of dissatisfaction with America at this time. Okay, by 1972, nearly half of Southern black children are in integrated schools, and many are still not, though. About a third of blacks have risen to the middle class, and so we made some progress, but we're not quite there yet. I have on here, okay, this is a quote. This is Richard Nixon. If you watch the video I put on the end here or read the book, The New Jim Crow, you'll see that the war on drugs, Nixon's the guy who used race and really cements the current political situation we have in America where white Southerners tend to vote for Republicans because Nixon appealed to them. He appealed to their racism. He promised to try to limit the spread of the laws that were promising integration or promoting integration in the South. He promised to do things like the war on drugs. So the war on drugs here is a good example. This is actually a quote by one of Richard Nixon's aides that said the whole war on drugs was an attempt to suppress black people. They put them in jail. It would be mass incarceration. That was done specifically for racial reasons. And again, Richard Nixon's the guy that starts it. But it continues on. Our current Democratic candidate running for president, Joe Biden, is famous for being the law and order senator and writing the law in 1994 that created mass incarceration in the 1990s and militarized the police that you're now seeing on the streets in their armored vehicles. That's Joe Biden who did that. So, but again, I want you to see that where this begins. This is King's last speech. If you get a chance, please watch this. It's amazing. It's one of his more amazing speeches. But I think his best speech is the one he gives about Vietnam. If you get a chance to watch that too, 1967. But this speech is also an amazing one. This is the documentary about the Black Panther Party. Again, please watch it if you want to have an understanding of what these folks are about or were about. And then the 13th. This is a movie that documents mass incarceration, and it gives you a really great history lesson about civil rights and where we were, where we are today. If you get a chance, I would sit down with your family and watch this. This is what's going on right now. So pay attention, check it out. Great movie. And then finally here, we talked about the Voting Rights Act of 65. In 2000, I want to say 7, I think it was, Alabama sued. It was Shelby County versus Eric Holder. And the Supreme Court ruled that a lot of the Voting Rights Act of 65 was no longer applicable. And they basically removed large parts of it so that now we have redistricting based on race in a lot of states. We've kind of gone back to the way it was before 1965. So my point here is things have changed, but they haven't always moved forward in a way that has been beneficial for civil rights. And so what you're seeing on TV today is very sad in our communities. But it's an ongoing process, and hopefully we can learn from it and move on and fix things. So thank you very much, and take care, folks.